All right, let's go to D.C. right now, the White House, see what they're saying.
The attack on the WCK convoy and the aid workers. As I said earlier, it wasn't the only event. There had been others like that, humanitarian aid convoys coming under fire and losing people. And the president felt strongly that it was time to talk to Prime Minister Netanyahu about his concerns.
Would you characterize this call as an ultimatum?
I would characterize this call as very direct, very businesslike, very professional on both sides. And the president laid out his significant concerns about the direction and where things are going. And quite frankly, laid out, as is clear in the readout, that we are willing to reconsider our own policy approaches here, dependent upon what the Israelis do or don't do.
Can you just tell us who all was on the call?
Well, it was a bilateral call between the two leaders, Prime Minister Netanyahu and the president. They were the only two speakers on the call.
But Vice President Harris also dialed in?
Vice President Harris did dial in, yes.
Secretary of State?
Secretary of State dialed in, Jake Sullivan, yes. I don't know who was also listening in on the Israeli side, but the discussion was between the two leaders.
MJ.
So, Admiral, you're not specifying what concrete steps Israel must take exactly.
I gave you a broad sense of it. We want to see more crossings opened up. We want to see more trucks getting in, particularly from Jordan. We want to see tangible steps at the mitigation of civilian harm, particularly to humanitarian aid workers, but obviously all civilians. But we want to see that they have moved forward on proper steps to deconflict with aid workers as they move around, that the information flow is viable.
Sure, but that's language we've heard for weeks now. You're not talking about sort of telling us how exactly you will measure those measurable steps, right?
What I said was, we're going to examine our policy approaches based on our assessment of the way the Israeli side modifies their behavior, modifies their policy and decision-making processes. And so, first of all, let's see what they say they're going to do, and then let's watch and see how they execute to what they say. And I don't want to get ahead of them on what they plan to say about the changes they're going to make, but we'll base our policy decisions based on an assessment of how they execute to their policy decisions.
And you're not talking about what potential U.S. policy changes are on the table. Can you say whether the president shared that with the prime minister on this phone call?
The president made clear that absent changes in the protection of civilians on the ground, absent changes to the volume of humanitarian assistance getting in, absent any movement on a ceasefire that will allow hostages to get out and more aid to get in, absent a calming down, that he will have to reconsider his own policy choices with respect to Gaza.
And one of the 7 aid workers was obviously a dual American citizen. Did the prime minister offer the president an apology?
I'll let the prime minister speak to his side of the conversation. I would note that the Israeli Defense Forces, their Southern Command commander, has made a public apology for the strike.
And there was no mention of Rafah in this readout. Can you talk to us about how, if that did come up, and how that might have been discussed between the two?
This conversation was focused primarily on the need to get a temporary ceasefire in place, the need for there to be a pause in the fighting, so that we can get the hostages out, humanitarian assistance, the need to see that steps are being taken to learn from this strike and to make changes in the way civilian harm is mitigated from an operational perspective. And they did spend time, as the readout makes clear, talking about the very public threats from Iran to Israel. And the president, as I said, made very clear to the prime minister that the United States' support for Israel's ability to defend itself from a range of threats, not just Hamas, remains ironclad.
Good, Danny.
Thanks, Queen. Thanks, Admiral. Just a couple of things. Firstly, how long did this call last?
It was about 30 minutes or so.
And just going back to, Jeff's question about the, why this sort of change in tone? I mean, has there been growing frustration on the part of President Biden that previous messaging to Prime Minister Netanyahu just doesn't seem to have gotten through?
Yes, there's been growing frustration.
Thank you so much, Karine. John, one question on Israel and another on Venezuela. We saw in the past President Biden pushing Netanyahu to protect civilians, but how much words really matter here when on actions the same day of the attack on the humanitarian wards, the U.S. was approving more bombs to Israel? We are now 6 months into the war. How much the U.S. actions are actually encouraging Israel to not do enough to protect civilians?
Yeah, look, I'm kind of glad the question came up because I would tell you when I've seen press reporting, about the arms sales and that kind of thing, and I would just remind you that with the exception of the immediate 2 months after the attack, we haven't really sent emergency aid and military assistance to Israel. There was in the first couple of months. But what you're seeing here is the result of a process of foreign military sales to Israel that takes years. And a lot of this material that's been reported publicly was notified to Congress many, many months, if not years ago, and are in the train to get to Israel. I think it's important to remember, as I tried to mention in the last answer, that Israel still has a lot of threats it faces. I mean, we're all focused on Hamas, and I understand that, but they still face active threats throughout the region, including from Iran. And the United States still has an ironclad commitment to help Israel with its self-defense. And so a lot of these articles, including the 2,000-pound bombs and the F-35s, those are things that have been long in the train and not tied. The foreign military sales process was not tied to this conflict.
Can I have one more on Venezuela quick? Because yesterday Nicolás Maduro enacted a law creating a province of Venezuela in Guyana, and he accused the United States of building secret military bases in Essequibo. So what is your reaction? And is the U.S. considering build a military base to support Guyana to defend their sovereignty?
There's no plans for a secret military base. And we've said many times that there's an 1899 arbitral ruling about the border between Guyana and Venezuela, and we want both sides to respect that ruling and to do it peacefully.
Thank you. You said we would hope to see an announcement of changes. I'm wondering if that is just hope, or is it an expectation? Is it based on a commitment?
We expect that there will be some announcements coming from Israel in the coming hours and days, but I want to respect their right to manage that process on their own.
Okay, and was there any update given by the Prime Minister on what exactly happened with the World Central Kitchen envoy?
They didn't talk about the actual strike in great detail. The Prime Minister did reiterate, as his military has reiterated, that this was on them. That the investigation was concluding, that he looked forward to seeing it, and that he would take appropriate actions to make sure something like that couldn't happen again. I mean, they did. Obviously, they talked about it, of course, but did they go through point by point the investigation's findings? No, because I think the Prime Minister's office is still evaluating the actual investigation results.
And just to try to get a technical understanding, as you described the very long process of supplying arms to Israel, if this contingency isn't met and there is a change in U.S. policy, how easy or hard would it be to slow down or change shipments to Israel based on current law and all of the requirements and all the things you just described?
Yeah, again, I don't want to get ahead of where we are. Let's see what the Israeli side does and says and what they implement and where they go before we talk about actual policy decisions. And I'm certainly not going to close down decision space for the President of the United States. He gets to make those decisions. But, I mean, obviously, as Commander-in-Chief, and yes, the foreign military sales certainly is supported by legislation, but there are certain authorities that you can do to manage that. But again, let's not get ahead of where we are. This is really about seeing what the Israelis say they're going to do and then act on those changes.
Okay.
Admiral, has the U.S. lost its leverage with Prime Minister Netanyahu?
You know, I keep getting this question about leverage. Israel's an ally. and a friend and a partner. And the president believes strongly and has for his entire public career in the security of the Israeli people and the longevity of the Israeli state. And that's not going to change. I can say unequivocally, and I don't think the Prime Minister would mind me saying here that in the call today, the Prime Minister reiterated his thanks to President Biden and this administration for the support that we have continued to provide Israel. It's long-standing. It was before the 7th of October, and it is now. And that support's going to continue. But again, with respect to Gaza, we need to see certain changes. And if we don't, then we'll have to consider changes to our own policy. But it's not about leverage. It's about the relationship, and it's about the credibility. I would even say the unique credibility that this particular president has in Israel and with Israeli leadership based on his long public service of support.
When you talk about this relationship, do you think the Prime Minister is really listening?
That's an update from the White House after President Biden and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had a around 30-minute call spurned from the 7 aid workers killed after an Israeli airstrike. They say that was a mistake. We do know a dual citizen, Canadian-American, was part of those 7 aid workers that were killed. The White House saying that President Biden has, quote, growing frustrations with what is happening between Israel and Hamas. And they said it was a very direct and very business-like call. They need to see certain things materialize, more trucks going into Gaza as well, primarily from Jordan, and moving towards a temporary ceasefire.